something just a little bit different, and that is certainly something that he has prided himself on throughout his competitive career so far.
All right, let's see how well it does against the Warrior deck from Cagnetta, who is playing the new stuff, the Mutinous, the Crash, full mulligan immediately. Oh, wow, Briarthorn growing out the main. I like it. It's the next evolution of Briarthorn. Is this Super Saiyan 3 Briarthorn? I think we're about to find out.
I'm not sure if you caught it, Dan, but just as we joined him, he either let out an almighty yawn or a massive battle cry, lion's roar, trying to hype himself up for the series. I'm going to assume, based on time zones, that it was the first.
Well, I refuse to believe that, and I'm going with the second.
Okay.
Briarthorn, known for his passionate war cries and rallies. Get the fans riled up.
These old bones just keep moving.
Coin Parade Leader into Parade Leader is the opening here for Cagnetta, which is extremely powerful. We saw a little bit of this earlier. I believe it was Coin Playmaker into Playmaker, though, that we saw, kind of just showing how much difficulty Rogue actually has with dealing with minions early. Really, their only good removal spell is Brain Freeze, and even that needs to be comboed early in the game to deal with a minion in a situation like this. So generally, you can just throw out these minions early in the game, and Briarthorn's just gonna have to hold that. There's not really a lot he can do about it in this spot.
I love the swivel on the chair, back and forth. Is he thinking about Hearthstone, or is he contemplating the meaning of life at the young early 20s? I'm not sure. No one really knows.
If he could just add in the white cat and the full 180-degree spin, I think that would just add to the image.
Oh, geez. It's not getting any easier. The Shadow Step does give Briarthorn some plays, but not many very fun ones to do here at the moment.
I suspect this might end up just being a field contact, Shadow Step your field contact kind of turn, because then he can kick off with a 1-mana field contact on the following turn and play the other 3 Battlecry cards, or the 3 combo cards in his hand, ending with Prize Plunderer to at least take back some of this board state if he doesn't hit, Brain Freeze, Devolving Missiles. No, he's just going to jam out the One Thieves now. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, personally, I feel a lot more fond towards Shadow Step being more than just a conjured mana biscuit, but, I think Briarthorn is trying to prioritize winning the board back, and it makes a lot of sense given how Rogue struggles in this matchup, so maybe from him, he doesn't want to wait for the card draw, he wants to prioritize preserving his life right here, right now, and he does pick up a Fireball, which is interesting. I wonder how he's going to be able to utilize that. Is he going to leverage it to push damage, or is he just going to use it for removal?
Yeah, it's a plan for sure, picking up extra burn in spots like this if he can then find extra Wicked Stab later on. He does hold the Shadow Step here, leaving up the Parade Leader on the other side. I was going to say my fear with this line that he's taken is that he already seems very all-in, like he's dumping so much of his hand already, double One Thief, Prize Plunderer already committed, that if he then uses Shadow Step as well, what does this field contact then do in his hand? It feels like that gets completely stranded. So I guess this is at least halfway, but this is why my inclination was to go with the field contact Shadow Step setup turn, because at least then he can do essentially the same turn he just played, 1 turn later, but he draws 3 extra cards from it, right? Which to me feels like a reasonable trade-off.
Oh, Cagnetta thinking about how he wants to play his turn 3. His hand is very expensive, which makes me feel like if he's going to lean into the expensiveness of how his hand is, maybe he just wants to play a smooth curve and go from 4, 5, 6 all the way to Mutinous and Alexstrasza. He does end up going with the Overlord One Thug. It makes the most sense. It's the most raw power level, and I think that's ultimately what's good for his hand right now.
Yeah, I agree. He has time with his hands still. Briarthorn's not showing any signs of doing anything quickly just yet. No Octobot early, which means the hand is still going to take some time to develop. So Cagnetta from here can just curve through Runthak into the Blademaster Samuro later. I think that's the one thing that Cagnetta's kind of missing right now, is the ability to just get a little bit of a buff on that Blademaster Samuro just so it can answer one of those huge field contact turns if it were to come down.
Some tough spots here for Briarthorn. I mean, he's Shadow Step, and he's swindling. He's trying to find a way to get some traction going, but all I see are cute plays that don't actually have substance of it, right? Nothing is really translating to him having meaningful board presence. He's just going to re-dagger and let it develop.
Yeah, and I certainly like the latter half of this turn. I'm unsure about leading off with Shadow Step Swindle because, again, that's a couple of pretty big resources that you're not lining up with your field contact. But I certainly like at least holding at the point he did because he still does have a pretty decent-looking field contact turn to lead off from now on the next turn with Prize Plunderers and Shadow Steps, again, following this up. Hopefully you can then pick up Foxy Frauds, something to amplify this even further, and actually try and get something going on his side.
Oh, yeah, take it. Briarthorn doesn't exactly combo with field contact either, so what are you planning on doing, Briarthorn? Are you going to draw the cards and try to see if you can continue to get the resources and fight back that way? Or are you going to shuffle in before you go for the field contact? So you can get the draws and hopefully get those little boars onto the board?
Give me that. Look what I want.
Seems to be option A. Wants to start drawing cards immediately. Finds a Wand Maker, another unusual tech here. Wand Maker makes its way a lot into the weapon-based rogues because you get a lot of access to poisons and additional damage. Right.
You don't pick the wands, see? Too soon.
Does hit Secret Passage this time, though, which is kind of the most universally good card that you can get from Wandmaker in most builds of Rogue. You're going to drop the Shadow Step here to be able to continue to cycle the Prize Plunderer, and this is the first really impressive turn that Briarthorn's been managed to piece together. But as we mentioned, it's really not that difficult for cagnetta to be able to take apart on the other side. A lot's been made already this weekend of just how good this matchup is for Rush Warrior, and I think we have been watching the warrior-favored side of this matchup happen over and over again. It does look unwinnable for Rogue based on what we've been seeing. It's not unwinnable. It's a bad matchup, but it's a bad matchup in Hearthstone terms, where you're talking about like a 40%, 42% matchup for Rogue. But we've been watching Rogue just get absolutely annihilated time after time after time, not only through this Masters Tour, but honestly it feels like through most of Grandmasters as well.
Right, which is kind of strange because it does end up winning games for sure against the Warrior. But yeah, you basically cited it exactly at that win rate throughout the first 4 rounds so far. Briarthorn, we're going to start off with the Venomous Scorpion. Another Shadow Step opportunity because the other things just generate resources which he doesn't really need. His hand's almost full. Take It Master makes its way onto the board. See if he can get some momentum finally rolling, but the hardest part is that Cagnetta's hand is about to hit its stride, right? Like Cagnetta feels like he's about to start doing some real powerful plays. It's going to be difficult for Briarthorn to navigate around.
It is still remarkably slow though, and this Blade Master now doesn't answer the board state perfectly. He can't take care of both the Ticketmaster and the Venomous Scorpion here, because he only has a 2-attack Blade Master, I believe. It's just received that 1 buff from the Runthak, if I'm keeping track of everything correctly. So either way, he is leaving something up on Briarthorn's side, and slowly a plan does start to get pieced together here for Briarthorn, because if Cagnetta doesn't take the board decisively this turn, which he won't, suddenly, with Kazakus, Prize Plunderer number 2, Shadow Step again, all coming into play, Briarthorn can have another very high-tempo turn on the following turn and start really threatening a lot of damage.
Yeah, it is one of the downsides of this deck list that we are seeing from Cagnetta is because he's playing a lot more heavier cards like that Mutinous. It can get stuck at times. So, an Octobot. Okay, what can we do with this here? Discount the hand with the Prize Plunderer? Do we have a big pop-off turn available?
It's very possible, right? If you just lead out with the Octobot and the Prize Plunderer, you will have 4 mana left. You're still able to drop Kazakus for 3. You could even do it this way around if you don't intend to do anything else and end up discounting the Golem. Because even after Prize Plunderer after Octobot and Prize Plunderer, you still have the Shadow Step available to you to be able to take out the minion on the other side. There's a lot of ways to go about this turn, honestly.
That's right. Finds opportunity for tempo or for even card draw. I think in his mind, he just wants to focus on what can help him get that board to snowball, especially with access to Alexstrasza and Firebolt at the top end. He's got to be thinking about ways to close out the game in a few turns if he can.
This is option C. It looks like he is going to hold on to the Prize Plunderer here. Those Prize Plunderers have been the ace in the hole so far for Briarthorn. He's been able to play so many of them by drawing 2, by hitting both Shadow Steps, and now by discovering the 3rd Shadow Step off the Venomous Scorpid as well, that they really do feel like the one thing that's keeping him in the game right now. Cagnetta, though, is going to rip the Mutinous, looking to hit that huge high roll of the Greater Golem on the other side. We can see Alexstrasza still available as well. Okay.
All right. Middling effect, and partially something that Briarthorn may be nodding towards is to holding on to smaller cards like that Foxy Fraud and Prize Plunderer. Now's an opportunity for that Greater Golem. Picks up another Ticketmaster. But I think in Briarthorn's mind, he's already considering about how he can set up a 2-turn lethal here if possible.
10. Does he even need a 2-turn lethal? I think his Golem is +2/+2, right? So
right.
If he just attacks with everything, Shadow Steps something, Prize Plunderer's his own Octobot. He then has 7 mana to play a 4-mana Golem and a 3-mana Fireball. I think that's just lethal right now, right?
So many options.
Let's count again. 6, 10, 18, 19. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, this is fine too. This spends the same 1 mana in a different way. It's the exact same deal. Yep. Drops the Golem, buffs everything up, fireballs the face. That is going to be game 1 for Briarthorn, and it has taken us a very long time. I was saying, Dan, we felt like we've been hitting the warrior side of the matchup time after time after time. It turns out all you need is to have Ticketmasters in your deck. That's the secret to winning this matchup as the rogue, as Ticketmaster sits on the board and even delivers the killing blow.
Absolutely. We just need more 3-mana 4/3s in the deck, apparently. And Briarthorn, the mad genius, has done it again. Game 1 in the books, and Rogue gets an unfavorable win. A couple more of those, and Briarthorn finds himself at the end of day number 1 in a pretty decent spot. But I think one thing that is surprising was just the lack of startup from the warrior deck. It just felt like it drew all the heavy-handedness, and that's definitely one point that I don't like when you're putting all the new cards in, the Crash, the Mutinous. It just feels like it doesn't get the warrior off to a fast start, which is often its biggest selling point, is that it's a powerful tempo deck that can get onto the board super quickly and start pressuring their opponents. And when you start holding this, like, I hope to draw the perfect 1 to 9, you get awkward, clunky situations like that.
I do think that's something you have to look out for as well. I know there's been a couple of games in Grandmasters where I've shouted this out, where I think people are getting a little bit too greedy with their Watleys and picking like really high impact options, like Runthak off of their athletic studies, for example. And there was an opportunity there for just the Dormant 3/5 rush to be taken and immediately played on the turn that the Discover was taken, right? Instead, Cagnetta went with Runthak instead, which kind of made a greedy hand all the more greedy. And I was on board with that because the curve made sense going in to buff up the Blademaster Samuro, but the Blademaster Samuro just never ended up even getting used because it really didn't impact the state of the board that heavily. But I think it's definitely something when you do have a greedy version of the deck like Cagnetta has, is just to avoid being greedy with some of your plays and some of your discovers. But we will move on, and now we are going to switch over to Briarthorn's side now, coming through with the Rush Warrior. His version of the deck, he is running a Stone Maul Anchorman in there, but outside of that, nothing particularly new or exciting when it comes to the Rush Warrior from Briarthorn.
Yeah, and also, just to tie that loop on my end as well, you did a great job summarizing it. From Cagnetta, I think he drew every expensive card in his deck that cost 5 or more, because he had the Ringmaster Watley, he had the Overlord Runthak, he had the 10 Trasher, all the way up to Alex Strauss and Troublemaker and Mutinous. I mean, it doesn't get heavier than that. So we'll see if this Warrior Mirror can perhaps reverse things a little bit, as Cagnetta looking to see if he can improve on his good performances so far. The self-proclaimed earner of a dubious title as the only Hearthstone player who has changed the nickname 6 times, Keck W. That's his bio. And
nice.
I appreciate a man who's not only, of course, good at Hearthstone but self-aware. So he's won me over.
I feel like if anything, Briarthorn will give him a run for his money on that one, right? Like old Sphinx Manatee over here has gone through quite a few names in his career as well.
That's right. Don't call me Brimful Briarthorn Sphinx Manatee.
Yes.
Taking a look at the opening hands, Briarthorn. Would you keep? So I guess there's the Overlord Runthok. Would you consider keeping anything else on top of that?
I mean, first off, if I've learned anything, Dan, it's that predicting how Briarthorn is going to mulligan is a mugs game, and I will not get involved in it. But I don't actually think that Runthak is a particularly good keep on coin as a one keep anyway. I think it's a card that you can keep and is powerful, but it's a card that you should generally keep when you already have the good stuff. The good stuff kind of being what Briarthorn has in his hand right now. You really want to look for that Imprisoned Gnarg, and you really want to look for those early power plays with the parade leaders. So I do think his hand improved quite a lot. I'm a little bit surprised that he held on to Stage Dive, which is, I would say, not a very powerful card in the mulligan, particularly going second. But that is kind of an inherent problem with the matchup, is that most cards do look weaker when you look at mulligan stats when you are going second, just because going first in the matchup is just generally so much stronger.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And, it's just that the impact of the hand buffs can be seen throughout time and time again of how it snowballs this matchup. But, you make up a really good point. Having those plays leading up to those power cards is just as important, if not more. ETC on turn 2, not a high impact card in this matchup. You can just use it for early game board and then see if Cagnetta can find an opportunity to get that discount on his next rusher to have a higher impact, whether it's Fish Flyer or even maybe that Runthok. Briarthorn picks up the athletic studies. You can already see that this is a situation where he has a lot of options at his disposal. Is there anything catching your eye immediately, Sottle?
No.
It's a very tough turn for sure, because you know that your opponent's likely to start developing on the following turn because of their athletic studies buff. So it's not like sticking a parade leader here seems like a very likely thing for you to do. So I do kind of like leading out with the athletic studies here. And I imagine he is just going to be taking a turn off. 10 Trasher, good pickup because he knows he has the Gnarg waking up on the following turn, which will count as a demon, get him an additional discount. So his 10 Trasher will start the turn costing 3, which is going to allow him to have a pretty powerful swing turn.
I think Cagnetta can just develop the Fishy Flyer or the Rakara, but understanding that the weapon comes out is just going to challenge whatever minion he plays anyways. Doesn't want to fall too far behind in tempo. Just because you know it's going to die doesn't mean that you shouldn't play it, because you need to keep the pace. Otherwise you're going to be stuck with the hand similar to what Cagnetta was experiencing in the previous game. The Imprisoned Gnarg wakes up. All systems are go for the 10 Trasher. No peek on the athletic studies. Briarthorn wants to get it out right now, and perhaps use that discount another time and doesn't end up corrupting his Stage Dive. So a pretty decent setup here for Briarthorn. It's on Cagnetta to find a way to respond, and all he can do is answer the 10th Trasher, which should give Briarthorn a pretty good opportunity to develop behind this.
Yep. Proactive plays are now being seized by Briarthorn. He has picked up the Blademaster Samurai, which is a key card in the matchup. It's a key card in most matchups, but Briarthorn will be looking for more aggressive tempo options here, I'm sure. So Stage Dive, first port of call, get the buffed minion potentially to be able to drop down. That can now be coined out if Briarthorn wants to play just a giant minion this turn. Alternatively, he can go digging in Athletic Studies to find a different option, but I am a big fan of just dropping down the huge minion here. Deals very nicely with the 3 expected plays, right? There's 3 possible plays for 5 mana from Rush Warrior: Watley, Runthak, Tent Trasher. It just so happens Cagnetta has all of them, and they're all terrible into this board state. So that goes to show you how powerful coining out a 7/6 here was.
And not quite the 4-mana 7/7 with Rush. But I guess we'll take that 1 stat loss to get that option available to him. Cagnetta goes for the Overlord Runthak to buff his hand, hoping that it can help catch him up. The Crab Rider. So we do have the Parade Leader to help make things a lot stronger and take up some nice trade-up opportunities. Gonna start things with the Athletic Studies. Perhaps that changes things. Ugh.
Yeah, kind of grim options, but honestly, I started that turn in the same space as you, where I was thinking just like Playmaker Crab Rider and use like 1 attack from the healthy Crab Rider plus the Weapon Swing to deal with the minion on the other side. Just have a nice wide board. Does get obviously punished by exactly Blade Master Samuro on the other side, but I think that's kind of the situation you face in a lot of spots in this matchup, and I think against just about any other possible hand, you had a really, really juicy looking board state that Warrior was going to struggle to deal with.
Well, Cagnetta can respond with his own Tent Trasher. It did take a little bit of damage. The big problem is that he still hasn't been able to flip the script and become the proactive player despite being the one ahead in the Mana Crystal, right? He did go first. Oh, he finds a Stage Dive buff. Blade Master Samuro, that's going to be useful later on.
It is going to be a huge deal, but this is a ton of damage being shipped through early from Briarthorn. He's got to connect face with the 7/6. He has another weapon swing. He has more weapon swings to follow. With ETC in hand, alongside full Parade Leader and Playmaker combo, he's really just kind of a bumper car away from a good time right now and being able to not even have to care too much about board and just switch to a straight-up damage plan.
Yeah, that's right. Has to consider how much you can piece together in 1 turn from hand, but weapon swings just puts Cagnetta effectively at 12 from our perspective. Now, unless that Venomous Scorpion can change the course of the way the life is lining up with Briarthorn's damage, this could end up being a crash course of Briarthorn beating down the opponent and hoping that he just can get there with his hand, plus anything that he draws, and Cagnetta just trying to hold off the pressure, hoping that Briarthorn stumbles, which he won't based off what we're seeing right now. That being said, I mean, Cagnetta does have some good comeback cards in his hand. Ways to answer the board, ways to build it, ways to refill his hand. Briarthorn does end up committing the Parade Leader onto the board. Rather aggressive stance. Does not actually end up being part of the ETC combo, but could be a very nice way to at least turn up the heat on Cagnetta.
Yes, it is very true. It doesn't actually add any damage to proceedings if he is going to be going with the ETC combo, but if he were to fall behind, I think just having the combination of Parade Leader and Playmaker in hand could help him catch back up. But I don't think Briarthorn's really planning to fall behind in this position. I think he understands that if he does start to fall behind, he is in trouble, because not only did Cagnetta go first and have initiative in the matchup, he's also ahead on hand buffs, right? It's not a great deal, but it's 1 attack of Runthak versus nothing on the other side from Briarthorn. So he knows that Cagnetta has all the tools to take this game long, and the Briarthorn really is just in the business of ending the game quickly. I think tempoing out an extra 2-3 on that board was a very reasonable thing to do, but you can see how important Blade Master Samuro can end up being in this matchup, because this is the first really big tempo swing turn that Cagnetta has had.
Yeah, and consequently, because Briarthorn had played his Parade Leader, he doesn't have nearly as many options.
Right.
Swing it back in his favor. So definitely something that I think Briarthorn wished didn't exactly go down the way it did, so he could have more ways to respond to his opponent's board state.
I gotta move.
And so Briarthorn could end up committing some of these more expensive cards like Blade Master Samurai or the Spectral Flyer. Is he thinking about just passing? Okay, he's based off the way the rope was burning and not giving him much time. I was kind of thinking if Briarthorn was just going to take it super slow and hope they can combo fully with Playmaker, ETC, and whatever rushers he gets. That's a troublemaker.
Troublemaker off the top on curve for Cagnetta. He will just take a few seconds, I'm sure, just to consider the alternatives. But I think the alternatives are not looking particularly attractive here. Even with Playmaker and Rakara being able to come down, I like just jamming the Troublemaker for sure.
Yeah, I mean, this speeds things up dramatically. All of a sudden, Briarthorn potentially will die next turn if he doesn't answer this board state. Right. As there's 12 showing. Oh, sorry, 15 showing.
Maybe... No.
As you mentioned, this is where the lack of that parade leader can come back to bite you. It's not quite as impressive when you don't have Bumper Car in hand. And I think, Briarthorn was probably quite rightly of the perspective that if he drew Bumper Car, he was far more interested in using it with ETC to get lethal than he was using it with the Parade Leader to clear a board on the other side. But I believe even on this turn, a Bumper Car draw would have been a little bit short of lethal still, right? Because he would have got 4 damage from the Bumper Car itself and then only had 1 more mana to play 1 more Rider for 4 more damage. So he only would have had 11 in total with the weapon swing.
I gotta move.
You are correct. And now Briarthorn very much desperate to try and stabilize. I think playing around Alex Straza is out of the question because even if he armored up, he'd be at 20, and that's 12 plus 8. So has to just be optimistic at this point. Going for it anyways.
My work.
So 12 showing on board, 20 is the magic number, which means after 1 attack from this second Troublemaker does attack the 1/1. I don't think he actually has board space. I think that's the thing that's holding him back right now from being able to get this lethal.
Trying to think if there's anything that's worth drawing with the Ringmaster Watley. I don't think it is. Yeah, maybe Cagnetta's point of view. Just pass it right back. Put a bunch of pressure. Slight load up.
Imagine he still just play the second Troublemaker here. You only have space for 3 of the ruffians to get summoned, but if all 3 of them go face, you do still get lethal on this turn. I guess the alternative is just to armor up and just try and consider what the range of damage from your opponent looks like in this spot, but he is going to go for the flip. And he's not going to get there. Bumper Car off the top. No! Oh, so close.
What? Does that stabilize his life total with the Samurai?
It's only +2/+2. He can play it alongside the Playmaker or the Crab Rider, though.
So many choices.
Right. So Samurai goes to a +2 or 3 attack, wipes all the 3/3s. And then Crab Rider can come down as a 3 attack. God, I don't think it wipes both the Troublemakers. That's the problem, right?
Yeah, he's a little bit short. Even attacking into one of the Troublemakers with the Samuro, still needs to send 1 Crab Rider attack into it. So yeah, it just doesn't cut it.
All right, well, Briarthorn
I gotta move.
just kind of showing the hand, I guess, at this point. Not really much that he can do, saying like, hey, this was like the opportunity.
Just making his opponent sweat. Yeah, Cagnetta just staring at the board, just saying, no, there's no way, that's not lethal. But yeah, he gets the good news in the end. It is, in fact, not lethal. But I do think the mid-game maybe was a little bit iffy there from Briarthorn, in my opinion. But I think the way he kind of set out his all-in stall at the end and stuck to it was commendable, just really looking for that bumper car draw towards the end of the game, right, to try and set up something with ETC. Things got a little bit messy throughout that mid-game, and we can go back and reflect on that decision. Yeah, that decision right there, whether or not to play the parade leader out on the board and expose it as he did, which I think ended up giving him more problems than solutions. But it is a sample size of one of that, watching that decision pan out, right? There are many other iterations where there isn't a Blade Master Samuro in the opponent's hand, and then all of a sudden that's just a 2-3 sticking to the board for the next turn for Briarthorn. He gets to really capitalize and build on that for the next few turns. So I'm not going to rag on that decision too hard, but certainly in that one instance, it was the moment that really sent him on a downward spiral.
Yep. Well, I mean, that just is it for the Warrior mirror, but Briarthorn's Warrior is still going to stick around up either against the Demon Hunter from Cagnetta, which is going to be coming up next here, actually. Does play the Acidic Swamp Ooze version. Only one Ooze, which I think is entirely reasonable. Two does seem a little bit overkill to me at times, as we saw, for example, in Lee's deck list that was up earlier in the previous round. So I personally appreciate a nice Acidic Swamp Ooze. I think weapon destruction is quite vital against a lot of things currently in the meta game. And, you know, whether or not it ends up being the MVP against certain other classes like Warrior, I don't think it's going to be super crucial, but I do like the inclusion of it.
Frodan, bear with me here, but what if I told you that, yeah, okay, you can just play one Acidic Swamp Ooze, but you have to have a Mankrik in your deck instead? Are you still on board with this plan? Because I'm not 100% sure what this Mankrik is doing, hanging around in this OTK Demon Hunter.
Well, I mean, Mankrik is pretty straightforward. You just play Green Man and you get 3 damage, right? Like, isn't that what you're trying to do? Just kill your opponent with big combos. I think maybe Cagnetta has some kind of like matchup that he's trying to tech for in particular. Maybe it's like the mirror, because I think a lot of people are accounting or trying to account for Demon Hunters. But I'm not entirely sure myself, and I'm ready to be impressed if that's what is going to happen here in this game.
Yeah, same. I will wait and see whether this is going to be genius or madness from Cagnetta here with the Mankrik. Quick and easy full mulligan, just throwing away a couple of I-beams from the opening hand, looking for more aggressive card draw options. Briarthorn on the other side. I imagine Imprisoned Gannag is going to be a hold here, and I think then it's very tempting to also hold on to Tent Trasher. We saw how powerful that 1-2 punch can be in the early game because of that guaranteed discount you get from the Dormant Demon waking up on curve, and I think big minions early is one of the best ways to really put pressure on OTK Demon Hunter. So I think far left and far right end up being the keeps here for Briarthorn. But again, I said I wasn't going to do it, Dan, and then I immediately predicted how Briarthorn was going to mulligan, and I've already realized that's stupid. Just keep ETC as well. Why not?
I mean, predicting versus discussing the merits of what you think are strong is totally fine here. And also, you know, I think that you have also now been mystified and enamored by the mysterious force known as Briarthorn. You are entranced, and now you are under his spell.
Boy, this is a curve from Briarthorn as well. Not only has the Gannag on 1, as I was talking about, but now curves that into Crab Rider on 2. You can actually get a ridiculously cheap Tent Trasher down on curve here. But there is now the prospect of Rakara even to tie all of this together. I think Briarthorn will just continue to play the regular curve here. Yes, he will.
I do like it, and puts the good amount of pressure starting next turn from Cagnetta. Does pick up the Acidic Swamp Ooze. Going to start things with a double jump. Finds a Spectral Sight. Pretty nice lineup here.
I see.
Organoth in hand. There's a couple of combo pieces that he would have preferred to discount for sure, but having a nicely positioned skull to the left of those two cards is just really a discounted Moog or a discounted Fellscream Blast away from having a fairly quick combo kill already built up in hand.
Does end up going to 10 Trasher. Just stats are good. The most amount of power. Rakara gives you 3 mana 3/4 worth of stats. This gives you 3 mana 5/5 worth of stats. You kind of boil it down to that core essence. Briarthorn just values bigger numbers. Can't fault him for that.
I grow
Yep. I think particularly loading the majority of your power as well, if you want to break it down further, into an individual 5/5 is stronger against Demon Hunter specifically, right? Like we talk about wide boards or tall boards quite a lot in Hearthstone, and generally against Demon Hunter, these individual big minions are the things that they struggle to deal with, as opposed to, for example, a Rakara board where it's a bunch of smaller minions with stats getting spread out across your board. So I do like this. There's a good chance that the 5/5 will now stick, and then if the 5/5 sticks, then you can follow up with Rakara on the following turn and start making that 5/5 even bigger, threatening more damage. But no such luck. Cagnetta does have the clear, and it's clear that he's quite happy to get rid of, honestly, because those are cards that he needed to get out of his hand anyway to make room for that Skull of Gul'dan over on the left. So Briarthorn is now going to have to start from scratch all over again.
Well, I mean, can reclaim it, so to speak, to that 10 Trasher, but can't play it this turn. Fishy Flyer! Something about 3 mana 4/3s with Death Rattles really speaks to Briarthorn on a spiritual level.
Yeah. So
look how satisfied he is. He's sitting back down, playing with his gorgeous mane, his luscious locks.
Yeah, I guess the more I look at it, the more I do actually kind of understand where his head's at here, because Rakara does have a certain amount of redundancy and was mana inefficient this turn. 10 Trasher was technically bigger and still mana efficient, but you would have to use the coin to play it here because it would cost the full, quote, 4, even after the Athletic Studies discount. I don't think Briarthorn wants to coin this turn, right? Because he wants to coin Troublemaker, which I think is a very good idea in the Demon Hunter matchup. So I think just by process of elimination, he just ends up on the biggest minion that he can play that turn, which does end up being Fishy Flyer, even though that looked initially a little bit strange. I'm actually kind of on board with it.
Yeah, and it also gives him something playable as well if he wants to follow along that line of thought, finds conditioning. Stage dive, picks up bumper car.
Very nice. Can still preserve the coin as well. I was a little bit afraid as to what this turn was going to look like. I suppose he could have still just thrown out the ETC if he really needed to there, but it was a weird turn to take a low pressure turn, right? Because obviously he wanted to play his conditioning, but the extra mana that he spent on being greedy did mean that he gave Cagnetta a very free skull on the other side. But luckily for him, I would say picking up the bumper car was basically the perfect minion for him to hit there to try and maintain maximum pressure.
And Briarthorn sees the skull, wants to continue that pressure. Cagnetta, by the way, his Skull of Gul'dan, we kind of been focusing a lot on Briarthorn's proactive game plan because Cagnetta's plan pretty straightforward. Draw cards, remove stuff, assemble combo. The Skull of Gul'dan hitting a bunch of one-cost spells, not really giving him meaningful discount that he's looking for. He's got to sting a little bit. And now he's going up against a very reasonable-sized board that's starting to get out of control.
And even if he's able to deal with this, he then has Coin Troublemaker to deal with, and he's already down 1 Immolation Aura as well. So mass removal is at a real premium for Cagnetta already, and Briarthorn is going to continue to pile on the pressure from this point.
Talented Arcanist can lead to stabilizing some of this board. Would have to part ways with additional resources in order to get full clear. Either his health or extra cards.
Right, I'm curious as to what the plan for the remainder of the turn is here, whether it is going to be the hero power, and I imagine it will be. If he just wants to drop out the ooze, yeah, has to take 6 here, which is a little bit painful, but he does at least get a minion in play, which can protect against the coin troublemaker just a little bit. But the hand has run very dry for Cagnetta on the other side, and this will be the absolute last thing that he wants to see in his situation. It honestly doesn't matter where these attacks go. All of the attacks are good for him right now.
True, and now Briarthorn shown a ton of pressure. That 10 health is so difficult to deal with. Cagnetta just has to start drawing and see if he can find something, because his hand, I mean, he's got Mankrik and Il'gynoth sitting on the far left. Those just feel so low impact. Finds a I-beam to try and maybe stabilize a little the board. I don't think it's good enough right now. He would have to, again, piece together multiple cards that I don't think he wants to use right now. At least not to take 8 damage to his face if he has to use Chaos Strike to remove his Troublemaker, for example.
I think he's forced to use both Moargs here. I actually think I-Beam was the right draw for Cagnetta off the double jump, but he's going to be forced to use both of his current Moargs to be able to deal with it with the I-Beam. He can then spend the rest of his turn on Illidari Studies, potentially, if he can Illidari Studies into a Spectral Sight, for example, here to go Outcast. Okay, he's actually just going to play for tempo with the minions. I guess this makes sense too. Sorry, not used to adapting my brain to having a Mankrik in my OTK Demon Hunter, but yes, having looked at it again, spending your last 3 mana on playing a Mankrik does seem to make a lot of sense here.
Yeah, well, at least in terms of what's available to you. I mean, when life gives you Ogres, you gotta make Ogre name.
Make Ogre aid? Yeah, I'm not sure how that sentence was going to end, but fine.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure either. Sometimes I start sentences and I just kind of let it go wherever it does, as you know.
Don't wheel, Dan. Don't wheel.
Especially at, 11 a.m., having stayed up all night casting Hearthstone?
Yes, 10 a.m. actually.
10
UK time, thank you very much. None of this European time, I'll have you know.
Fair enough. Briarthorn can just kind of pick up exactly where he started. Cagnetta has committed a lot of his resources already to get to this point.
Briarthorn just kind of doing what he must here, just dealing with the Moargs, kind of essential. It is a good matchup for Moarg Artificer. Generally, they get very good value. You can even look for spots where you can just force out a huge board. We were talking about it in the previous series that you and Raven were casting, where potentially Alatemu missed a spot where, even though he didn't have lethal, he had the opportunity to, I think, put his opponent to 2 while making a big board of Il'gynoths and Moargs in the process, which is a spot that you can look out for. That was something similar. Obviously, it wasn't a bunch of damage being pressed, but just the opportunity to swing the state of the board and get those big Moargs down meant that Briarthorn had to divert, right? He had to spend his turn using his rush minions to rush into the Moargs, whereas most other decks will just quite easily be able to shoot spells at them, and it does slow down the Rush Warrior quite significantly when they have to do that.
It's all true. Cagnetta can start picking up resources again through the Spectral Sight. Chooses the Philosophy. Okay. Finds a Skull.
Grows short.
Which is playable because he's carrying the discount, and then he hits Moarg, which can now be duplicated with the Philosophy he picked up. That Philosophy pick is looking extremely intelligent right now. 5 cards remaining, and 2 of them are still Fellscream Blasts at this point. All of a sudden, Cagnetta is looking like he has absolutely turned a corner here.
Wow, very impressive from Cagnetta, and you can see he's kind of dialed in. There's not much that Briarthorn can do from this angle right now. Maybe start racking up the damage a little bit with the Dark Moon Riders, trading in. But outside of that, you're almost just at the mercy of whatever Demon Hunter draws now.
Yep. And of these 5 remaining cards, as I said, 2 of them are Fellscream Blast. 1 of them is Ogre, which is a redraw as well as being 3 extra damage and a giant minion in play. So there are very good odds for Cagnetta just to hit straight up lethal on the following turn. Cagnetta will be fingers crossed and buttocks clenched, just hoping this is not one of the bricks coming off the top here. Because if he does hit a brick, his hand really doesn't do a lot else this turn.
Right, and he's still safe. It does feel like he at least has another turn after this next one, and that does look to be a brick.
Yeah.
So at least he has that buffer room. That HP he's bought himself will come in handy, but he doesn't get many more of those. Then, knowing that ETC is on the board, do you feel uncomfortable playing any minion right now?
I feel very uncomfortable about all of this. Like, even those 2 1/1s on the board, they're not 1/1s, they're 3/1s right now, right? Like, this is actually just so much damage being represented on the other side, where Cagnetta here might even have to look at, like, Blood Mage Thalnos shoot his own Blood Mage with the Ethereal Org Merchant, try and hit the Fellscreen Blast, which even though it won't be lethal, it goes back to that kind of play I was talking about earlier, right? Where you can just clear the board with your big Fellscreen Blast and just try and consolidate from that position. But it looks like he is just going to try and hold. Just take his setup turn with the Blood Mage developed. This was something to look at on the previous turn as well, where he chose not to play 0 mana Blood Mage because he wanted the spell damage in hand to deal extra damage. But of course, one of the remaining cards was that extra source of spell damage with the Ethereal Org Merchant as well, which kind of changes the odds a little bit. So very complex endgame for Cagnetta to have navigated here.
Now with Alex Strauss in the hand, has that burst damage lined up for next turn. Three, 5, 6, 7, plus the 4 damage from the Rusher, so 11, 14 damage from hand, 18 if you count the Crab Rider.
Yep. Yeah, I got the same number. It appears to be 18 from Briarthorn this turn. That is Warblade's number 2, but there are 3 cards remaining. 2 of them are Fellscreen Blast, and the remaining card is Olgra. It is Mankrik Enraged, so Cagnetta is guaranteed a Fellscreen Blast on the following turn.
He is there. His opponent's at 23, a pretty crucial break point as opposed to being at 25.
And 24 is the amount that Cagnetta is going to have here. Regardless, without that being the draw, he will get the extra 3 damage this way, but it's not going to end up mattering. But we can chalk it up as a W for playing Mankrik in OTK Demon Hunter if you really want. I'm feeling generous, Frodan. We can give it to him. Genius deck building.
I mean, it's the ultimate victory cigar, if you ask me. Having Olgra deal the initial points of damage, and the Fellscreen Blast dealing for 24. And number 3 goes to the OTK Demon Hunter. Now Briarthorn's Warriors on the verge of being swept. The highest performing class that isn't Priest has been Warrior so far today, if you're going based off the raw win percentages in the field. And just would be quite a surprise to see at the very end of our day's broadcast, because we did get word that we're not going to be filling. This will be the last series that we broadcast for today. Ends up being a Warrior sweep, or sweep against Warrior, rather, because that does make it sound like Warrior won all 3 games.
Yes, in I guess, Conquest terms, a Warrior sweep. The only kind of sweep that is possible in Conquest. But yeah, I think it was a very impressive game overall for Cagnetta. He looked dead, like D-E-T dead early on in that game, but he was able to turn it around very, very rapidly. I love the way he set up that end game. I think there was a couple of really tricky decisions, whether to play the Blood Mage 1 turn earlier, throw away the potential for the 24 before he had the security of the extra minion to come back to still deal that 24, and the decision to not go fishing with the Blood Mage and immediately shoot it on the turn, where he just technically risked being dead against a couple of specific things from the opponent. I think both of those were some tough decisions to make from Cagnetta's side, and I think even the setup going back several turns before that was all done very, very nicely. So that is one of the cleanest games of OTK Demon Hunter that I think we've seen today, even if he does have a Mankrik in his deck for some reason.
It's nice that he handicapped himself in the eyes of me and Sottle. To make it a little more fair for everybody else is the way we can wrap that one up. Spell Mage on deck, Deck of Lunacy is included as opposed to some anti-aggro. I've asked you, we talked a little bit about it on broadcast. How do you feel about Spell Mage right now and how it's positioned in the metagame?
Yeah, I don't quite have Gia's level of authority to talk about this deck. I was just a lowly top 50 gamer with Spell Mage. I never hit the heights of rank 1 as she did. But honestly, we shared a lot of opinions on the deck where up until very recently, I thought 4-mana Deck of Lunacy was a real waste of a spot, and that most of the matchups that existed in the game, you just kind of went with the burn plan anyway, and even if you drew Lunacy, you turned it down most of the time. But I think the metagame evolved to a point after the Springwater nerf where I really came round to Deck of Lunacy, and a couple of players across the different regions of Grandmasters who actually played Deck of Lunacy very well really opened my eyes as to, you know, some of the skill expression that you did still have with the card, even though it is inherently quite random. And I've come around to it quite heavily. So I think, you know, Deck of Lunacy is a good card to be in there. However, Mage as a whole, I'm just really not feeling it right now. Like, I genuinely think that the people who continue to bring Mage, like, they are just one with the flow, right? Like, they just draw the blue card on 2. It's the only real explanation, because I think the deck absolutely struggles to win games of Hearthstone outside of that at the moment.
Yeah, no, it especially against Face Hunter. Like, when you got aggression coming your way from one of the most aggressive possible decks in the metagame, it's going to be tough for the Mage to stabilize there.
This matchup is borderline impossible for Mage. I was playing some Face Hunter the other day. I was going second, which is already a bad sign. Missed my 1-drop, so I passed turn 1. I missed my 2-drop, so I hero powered on turn 2. On turn 3, I had drawn a 1-drop, so I played that 1-drop and hero powered on turn 3. It's about as bad as an opening as you can have against Mage with Face Hunter. It wasn't close. I killed them on turn 7. Like, it was still the freest matchup I have ever seen in my life. Like, Face Hunter just absolutely destroys this deck. It is hard to imagine a world where Mage gets out unscathed.
Yeah, it does require Mage to line up some very difficult things, like getting Deck of Lunacy to start healing you if you're able to get the Librams. That's often also conditional on getting the Incanter's Flow. That's the way I've seen it, and that's not even anywhere near reliable as we do go into the games for the Mulligans. As we take a second to see what Briarthorn eventually keeps, as you could talk a little bit about the merits of building up that early board, I do want to ask you, what do you think? So true or false? Mage is Hunter's best matchup this weekend so far in Master Tour Dalaran.
But as in Hunter has one more against Mage than any other deck?
Yeah, like its highest win rate right now in the field is against true or false?
I would say yes if you're allowing, like, for reasonable sample sizes. Like, it's probably better against, like, Paladin or Warlock, like one of the bad classes that no one's bringing. But outside of that, it probably is the best matchup.
You are correct on all fronts.
Okay,
as usual,
nice.
in a very annoying fashion. It is exactly that situation.
You got to get out of bed earlier in the morning than that to catch me out, Frodan. Come on.
That's right. Maybe I should have asked you at 4 p.m.
That's right.
After you stayed up for 30 hours and casting Hearthstone. Jeez.
Yeah.
Right. Well done. Well played. Briarthorn pressuring. I mean, you summarized it exactly right. Hunter is good at punishing the slow decks and the bad decks, as it turns out, but a lot of decks are. Cagnetta starts off with his Incanter's Flow, finally getting some momentum to stabilize, but the pain train is going to keep coming.
Yeah, this is about as good an opening as Cagnetta could possibly hope for here with the multiple flows, spending his mana on 1, having Brain Freeze as well to throw into this, and his prize for how good his start has been here is to be at 22 after Briarthorn's turn 3, with a huge board still facing him down on the other side. This is the one time where actually I was very much on board with Briarthorn's Mulligan. It's rare that I will be ambitious enough. Well, first off, it's rare that I'm playing Wriggling Horror in my Face Hunter. It's not a card that I'm a huge fan of. But even if when I have tried it out, I've rarely been so ambitious as to keep it in a hand like that with Wolpertinger and Adorable Infestation. But again, I think against Mage specifically, you know they're not going to spend their early turns just dealing with your 1/1s, right? Stuff like that is going to stick to the board. So I do like the ambitious keep there for Briarthorn. You can see how easily it's paid off with the Wriggling Horror landing and pushing so much damage in the early game now.
Well, it's doing a ton of work. Getting Cagnetta to basically halfway point.
Yep.
If he so desires this turn. Do have to push 5 and maybe Rinling's Rifle. Maybe even just set up some small stuff in Hero Power. Pick apart the life total through Death by 1,000 paper cuts. I will say Cagnetta playing the second and Cander's Flow. I mean, we've seen Mage get the gas, the goods, in order to really start turning things around. But will require next turn, because I would say that if Cagnetta whiffs next on his next draw, I think the game's over.
I think Freezing Trap was the selection there for Briarthorn, which is some good foresight here because he's understanding the state of the game, where Apexis Blast is the likely play here for Cagnetta on curve, and that means the 5-drop that comes down, as long as it's something that doesn't have a immediate impact like a Raz, for example, that by preloading that Freezing Trap, Briarthorn can now just say, well, I ignore your minion and I continue to go face because I already have it dealt with this Freezing Trap I chose. Cagnetta's going to divert, though, look for the card draw with the Cram Session, which I do like. He does have some very significant high roll potential in his deck because of how cheap everything is right now.
Oh, the Imprisoned Phoenix. I love to live in the world where Cagnetta thinks that he's going to live in 2 turns.
All right, Combustion Imprisoned Phoenix is not bad here.
Time runs out on me.
I'm on board.
Ring Toss not corrupted, so gonna have to work on that in a future turn.
Yes.
So Briarthorn has 4 damage available this turn just for the Hero Power and the swing, 6 damage in the form of the Hero Power in the following turn, and 9 to the Quick Shot. So magic number 6 from here. Tracking.
Yeah, Snappick's second tracking, neither of the other cards said the word damage on them, so he is completely uninterested at this point in the game. He is just looking for more quick shots. He'll take Wound Prey, he'll take Rhino at this point. Just cards that deal immediate damage is basically all he's interested in right now.
Makes sense to me. Tracking again. Looking for anything that, as you say, can deal the damage, whether in the form of minion or spells.
Now.
Trampling Rhino? That's too expensive?
Might well be. There's no guarantee that minions get left up on the other side either, because I believe the second secret taken now for Briarthorn was an explosive trap. So between the freezing and the explosive, I don't think there's any real guarantee that minions are remaining on board for the Rhino to run into.
Not guaranteed now. Kind of guaranteed on the following turn, though, because of the Imprisoned Phoenix. But yeah, it's
true.
Not ideal.
Oh, this ring toss is still just ever so slightly awkward here.
Yeah, but maybe this Apexis Blast can help give Cagnetta some counter-offensive possibilities. Finds a Twilight Runner, activates a Freezing Trap with no Snake Trap to follow it, no Pack Tactics. I think Cagnetta was hoping to see if he could eliminate both of these traps at the same time.
Yeah, if he'd have hit Pack Tactics there, even if he'd have hit Snake Trap to an extent, obviously the Combustion would have done a little bit of extra work for him.
3, 4 damage to the Wound Prey, 5 to the True Aim Crescent, 7 through the Hero Power. And that would put him at 10 for the following turn. It's actually not a 2-turn lethal setup here for Briarthorn. At least not yet.
Yeah. Interesting that he has gone for Rhino with extra steps, but it does make sense, right? Because of the dynamic that you were talking about, where the Phoenix is now just waking up this turn. So by delaying his Rhino coming into hand by 1 turn, he is able to get that buff on it with the Warsong Wrangler and now use that to push extra damage over the Phoenix on the following turn.
Deck of Lunacy, Sottle. He can draw with the Twilight Runner as well. Oh? Gonna draw first. Doesn't want to get any... Or maybe just wants to find a way to potentially just win right here.
I think he's looking for lethal, right? He still has both Spring Waters left in his deck at that point. He still has all his Fireballs. He still has another Apexis Blast left in there as well. So I think his initial dig was for those refreshing Spring Waters, but now he's going to have to divert and look for a way out of this instead. Hand of Gul'dan.
Oh? At this point, we just have to kind of wait and see
Time runs out on
if he
me.
can pull himself out. Storm Strike? Oh.
I just saw blue Shaman cards coming out, and I was like, oh,
Yeah.
these have lifesteal. This is high potential, but no. Still only the 7 health now remaining, and I believe the combination of the Trampling Rhino and the Quick Shot is going to square up this series, send us to a 5th game now in our final series of the day.
Good effort from Cagnetta, but it was very difficult to even make that happen. And yeah, I think it was entirely predicated on the refreshing Spring Water, like you said. Was not rewarded. Again, Cagnetta just kind of showing that he understands what he's playing for at these tough junctures. But, you know, also to Briarthorn's credit, not many people are bringing Hunters, and if you can line it up against the Mage, it's a free dub, it feels like, for many people's lineups when they have that lineup accordingly. So now we go to Mage versus the Warrior. And in that sense, you know, it doesn't feel like it gets that much easier. But we'll see. We'll see if Briarthorn can close it out here because, you know, the Mage versus that Warrior has been looking pretty good for Mage so far today. And I wonder if that's going to carry over here because Briarthorn does have a standard Warrior list. It's like the one list that he has that seems to be standard.
Yeah, and it's a tough matchup on both sides, honestly. It's fairly even. The card Devolving Missiles, of course, is massive in the matchup, as it tends to be, not only because it's one of the ways that Mage can efficiently deal with massive stats without actually having to throw burn damage at them, but it's also the ability to deny the Dark Moon Riders and deny resources, right, and really shut down those death rattles from the bumper cards, which can mean that the Warrior loses a lot of pressure. So I think, you know, early Incanter's Flow obviously goes without saying. Cagnetta will hope that he hasn't used up all of his Incanter's Flows for the series in that kind of useless game against Hunter where it almost doesn't matter how many flows he had in the opening hand. He will be looking for one, at least, of Mr. Blue card coming out in the matchup where he really, really needs it against Mage. But I really do think it's more predicated on the mid-game in this match, and it's whether the crucial mid-game clears are there for the Mage, right? With the combustions, the devolving missiles, the combinations of those cards, just to be able to not fall too far behind on the mid-game. Because if it gets to the point where Mage is like scrambling on turn 7 to hit Flame Strike to try and recover the board, that's usually too late. They want to be trying to take a grip a little bit earlier than that, in my experience.
All right, well, here we go. Game number 5. Winner gets to go to sleep. Happy man at 4-1. Loser ends the day at 3-2 and would be playing for record and hoping that the tiebreakers are good enough to go from there. We'll see, as they will have almost no room for error at that point. They would love to get that buffer room going into date number 2. Brian, we're going to start things off. Coin Crab Rider.
Whoa!
What patch is this?
Really? Really? Briarthorn, you know that doesn't have Wind Fury anymore, right? Like, you do know that. I just want to check.
Oh, it's a lot more than just playing the Crab Rider with or without Wind Fury. It's about sending a message.
Okay, fair enough.
Right. Are you the Crab or are you the Murloc? Cagnetta is kind of the question he's asking.
Yeah, sure. Just draw bumper card to follow up.
I mean,
I imagine the curve was originally, the plan was just to play out ETC here, just to follow this up. It does start pushing extra damage with the Crab Rider, which does make a lot of sense. It's not obviously the massive, devastating force that it would have been did it still have Wind Fury. But speaking of devastating forces, that is perhaps the most devastating force in the game still, even after all the nerfs that the Mage has been hit by. That is still the one way that it can compete with the very best decks in the game if it is able to draw that Incanter's Flow early. All right, 0 mana Brain Freeze does kind of pull this hand together quite nicely.
does. It's an opportunity for Cagnetta to try and respond. A little bit awkward with the sequence, though. Would love to have Brain Freeze and damage, say, the bumper car.
Yes.
Rush in the middle. That would be, of course, a little too convenient.
Yep. We'll just have to make do with leaving up a 2-3 bumper car at the end of the turn. I think this is the best he can do. Obviously, I think the completionist part of people's brain would just tell them to shoot the combustion in the middle because it deals the perfect 4 damage to the minion, but technically this way is just ever so slightly better. First off, he does get to deal an extra point of damage this way, and secondly, you're not giving your opponent the options of having the Dark Moon Riders back in hand, and as I already talked about, there's that devolving missiles out later in the game where you could potentially deny that Death Rattle altogether at some point.
Yeah, very true. Now here we go. Potentially an inflection point of Cagnetta turning things around. Finds a Nars Storm Crash. Getting +2 attack for the hero and Wind Fury. It's not every day you get to see, or rather hear, Jaina's voice line attacking. Oh, I guess we don't get to hear it on the Observer client here. But Cagnetta gets a nice little Easter egg.
Yeah, very nice. Choosing to go the board control route as well, which I am a fan of, because obviously now this is the turn where Rush Warrior generally wants to be slamming Ringmaster Watley, and Briarthorn no longer has that option available to him unless he wants to leave up one of the scariest minions in the game on the other side, representing so much damage in a single card.
Choices.
Yeah, no kidding. Briarthorn does have the answer in the form of the conditioning, but would not prefer to use these kinds of cards to just address minions against a minionless mage deck.
Here for a good time.
Gonna drop the Crab Rider here, and I imagine take a value trade here where possible. Taking a little bit of extra face damage there, really to preserve a 3-2 in play, which is probably worth it in the long run. He is still fairly healthy. Yes! Yes! I've been waiting all set for the full spin. He did a full 360 and walked away from this series, Dan. That's what I've been waiting for this entire time.
That's right. Why do they call it Hearthstone 360? Because you do a 360 after you Crab Rider and then you walk away.
It's still the best, because even in the year of our Lord 2021, someone gets got every single time without fail. Like, I don't know how it still keeps working. It's just evergreen.
I love evergreen memes. They're great. Cagnetta only with the one secret ring toss, which I think might be one of the more underrated plays that people ignore in this kind of deck. I think it can be very useful and hits the ice barrier, gets rewarded immediately with that life gain.
Ladies and gentlemen, prepare to be amazed.
Is going to be the Watley coming down now, though. As I said, this is kind of that spot, right, where Cagnetta has Flame Strike, but because he hasn't got a decisive grip on the board already, because he's not already threatening huge amounts of burn damage, it just feels too late, because at this point in the game, the Rush Warrior minions just tend to get too big for Flame Strike to even make a dent. You can see that exact dynamic that I was talking about being born out here.
Oh, I love it. Now we're starting to go from the evolution of Briarthorn from former Hearthstone Grandmaster to Pantene Pro V advertisement model.
That's right. Yeah.
Showing off. Maybe he's born with it. Or maybe it's just Briarthorn. How to answer this Ringmaster Watley, otherwise damage is going to start racking up. This early Crab Rider, or rather the early pressure leading into this Crab Rider and Dark Moon Rider, doing a lot of damage. 14 health is all that stands between Cagnetta and death in this series at the moment.
Yeah, don't I have egg on my face, Frodan? This Crab Rider has absolutely run this game up until this point, from being coined out on turn 1, and now it's looking very much like it might be still hanging around to deliver lethal at the end of the game, especially with ETC coming out nice and early now. Briarthorn going for the jugular, and you love to see it.
I mean, that's what the Warrior can do, especially with Alexstrasza in hand.
Yeah.
Now the magic number has turned to 3. Actually, turned to -1. I forgot about the ETC. That's going to put cagnetta in a very tough spot. Woo! One more for the fans. I love it, Briarthorn. A man of the people. Stop it. The sex appeal can only continue to rise at such critical levels here, Briarthorn. I can't.
I know, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure where we stand with Watershed having broadcast through the night and now hit the early hours of the morning at this point, but yeah.
That's right. Hearthstone Esports After Dark.
Exactly.
Needs to wipe. Flame Strike does look appealing, but doesn't solve the issue if cagnetta is just going to die pretty soon.
He needs to straight up get lethal in essentially a turn and a half from this point, because there is nothing in Mage that plays around being Alexstrasza to the face. There is just no defense to that coming down. And I just don't think cagnetta has the tools to put this together. This is a march towards the inevitable conclusion.
Yep, not really think of any combination. No Apexis Blast minion summoned that can immediately stand out unless it gains armor. They get the Ironhide, but it's still probably not enough because you have the weapon swing, so it's very unlikely at this point.
Bones just keep moving.
It's extremely unlikely at this point.
Briarthorn just going to load up one more time, but even if Deck of Lunacy with a draw here for cagnetta, he doesn't have the ability to draw cards after playing Deck of Lunacy, and he needs some Deck of Lunacy tools to be able to get him out of this game, because nothing in his deck will prevent Alexstrasza lethal from coming down here. Envoy Rustwix could have a little bit to say about it if he had some more time, but he just doesn't. He is just facing down lethal on the following turn.
And almost in a cruel twist of outcomes here, cagnetta draws Deck of Lunacy, the one card that could bail him out if he had more time and played it much earlier. And that's going to do it. Briarthorn gets Game 5 victory and advances to Day 2 in 4-1 record in stunning fashion. I mean, it was a great series. That's a good one to end on. Briarthorn able to do it, and with his own style too, right? Like, he's brought his lineup that has the Hunter. He's got some of those interesting techs in his Rogue, and he's also got some standard stuff, right? Not to show that he's not just like beaming it up the entire way. He's got a real interesting game plan going on, and is rewarded with the win.
Yeah, and honestly, I think it was a pretty solid performance from Briarthorn throughout. I think he had some questionable decisions, maybe a few things that I would have done differently, but I don't think any of the complete nonsense that we've seen from Briarthorn in a couple of his games. And I'm very happy to see him just making another good run back through Masters Tours. We had our fun with him in Grandmasters, and I think it would be fair to say that he kind of found his level when he